All right. I want to thank everybody for coming. Today we've brought together law enforcement professionals, tech innovators, and a parent of a school shooting victim to talk about new solutions to a historically controversial problem dividing our nation and its active shooter incidents. My name is Antoinette King. I'm founder of Credo Cyber Consulting, been in the security industry for about 20 years, specifically around technology and the K-12 environment and the bridging the gap between law enforcement and K-12 has always been a passion of mine, so I'm appreciative to be here and talk to this esteemed panel. Before we start, I'd like to just do make some introductions. First, I'd like to introduce Secret Holt. Secret's 15-year-old daughter, Bailey, was shot and killed by a gunman during the Marshall County High School shooting on January 23rd, 2018. The shooting took the life of Bailey and another student, and 14 other people were injured. Secret, I'd like to thank you personally as a mother for being here. Your courage is inspiring, and I'm just so grateful for you being here.
Thank you.
Next we have Troy McCanna. Troy spent 23 years with the FBI as a multi-jurisdictional task force coordinator supervisor. Troy was a first responder to the Oxford High School mass shooting on November 30th, 2021 outside Detroit, Michigan. On that day, 4 students were killed and 7 people were injured, including a teacher. Troy has retired from the FBI since and is currently Vice President of Enterprise Solutions at Robotic Assisted Devices. Welcome, Troy.
Thank you.
We also have with us representing local law enforcement, Craig Scatola. He's a CPP. Craig is a police supervisor with nearly 2 decades of law enforcement experience in Westchester County here in New York. Craig is currently the supervisor of one of the largest and most proactive school resource officer programs in Westchester County, spanning across 2 school districts. Craig conducts risk and vulnerability assessments and works as a security advisor to both public and private schools, houses of worship, local critical infrastructure owners, and a myriad of other public-private sector facilities. Craig, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And finally, rounding out our panel today, we have Steve Reinharz. Steve is founder and CEO of Robotic Assisted Devices, also known as RAD. Steve is well known and very highly respected in the security industry, services industry. His company, RAD, is a pioneering leader in the development of AI-driven autonomous security and safety solutions that often take place of human guarding and security personnel. Steve will be demonstrating a few of his tech solutions following this panel discussion today. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Antoinette.
So before we kind of got into the technology piece, I wanted to set the stage a little bit with statistics around school shootings. So the Center for Homeland Defense and Security hosts a website, and it's specific to K-12 active shooter events. And as of this morning, the U.S. has had over 2,042 incidents since 1970, and the numbers are increasing. Alarmingly, 958 of those events have taken place since Sandy Hook in 2012. Since Columbine in '99, the number of students who have reported personally experiencing gun violence in their K-12 experience exceeds 311,000 students. And 6 months into 2022, we have well over 24 shooting incidents on K-12 campuses. School shootings have returned to pre-COVID numbers, and some say that they're actually higher than they were pre-COVID. And the U.S. Department of Homeland Security research shows that if we know the signs then of gun violence, then we actually can start working towards prevention, and that's kind of why we're here today. We all know that it's impossible to take guns off the streets. We can't legislate our way out of this. We also know that it's improbable to arm every teacher in every school. So that's going to be unrealistic. So we want to talk about what are some other things that can be done. Secret, first I'd like to speak with you and hear your story about your daughter Bailey and what transpired around that event.
The morning of January 23rd, 2018, my husband dropped my daughter off at school as every day. He dropped her off at 7:42 that morning, and 7:57 is when the shots were fired, striking her twice in the back. She was trying to run from the shooter, and she fell, of course. She was dead on the scene. Her dear friend Preston They were together in the commons area. He was injured severely and ended up passing within the next hour at the hospital. Her boyfriend was standing next to her, and he was shot in the face. Thank God he survived. He still has physical disabilities because of it. Bailey has a sister named Lily. She just turned 16 in March. It's been a very traumatic nightmare. Every single day we relive it. I remember getting the call that when the shooting happened, I called my husband and told him, and I could hear in the background the ambulances and first responders driving by our home to get to the school. At that time, of course, we didn't know that she was gone. So we were all instructed to go to the middle school that day to wait for the students to get off the school buses. Several of my friends were there with us. It's a close community. We all know each other's children well. All of their children got off the bus and ran to them, and Bailey did not. So the very last bus that unloaded that day, of course, Bailey wasn't on there, and that's when we were told what had happened. She was struck twice in the back. Hopefully, she didn't suffer, and that's what I think about to this day. There's been so many school shootings since then, and it's really sad when you hear of these tragic events, and it's really not a shock anymore. Legislators, school officials, even down to the president, it's just like a copy-paste statement every single time. Thoughts and prayers are great, but it's not solving the problem. It's not changing anything. I worry about my daughter Lillian every day going to school. She is a sophomore, will be this coming school year. She started her freshman year at Marshall County, which is where the shooting took place. I was very skeptical. She wanted to go. So she did okay. And then about midway through the year, she really started having issues just being in the same facility that the shooting happened in. She got a lot of, just because of who she is, she got kind of, I wouldn't say bullied, but kids said a lot of things to her because all the safety precautions that we had tried to fight for, they blamed it on her for the inconvenience, just because of who she is and who her family is and what had happened. And of course, Uvalde, it's just such a tragic nightmare, and so many things could have been done to prevent that. I mean, it may have still happened, but 19 kids versus, and it's tragic. It is so tragic. But it's a nightmare that we live every day. People still point fingers at us. We can't really go anywhere without people wanting to talk about it, which I know people are going to talk about it, of course, but and I really don't think people know what to say. And we don't expect them to say anything, but it makes a lot of people uncomfortable too. So, yeah. But we're trying to make as much change in the state as we can. Senate Bill 1 passed in 2019 that says we have to have school resource officers in each school in Kentucky now. The governor just passed that legislation not too long ago. Does it help? Absolutely helps. But it only helps if you are reacting to a situation, it's not preventing it. So I do believe there are a lot of things that can be done to prevent that from.
And there's no standardization, which is also an issue. You know, you go from school to school.
Sure.
There's no standardization in technology and training and all of that. So it becomes a challenge. If you move from one state to another, you don't know what the new rules are when you go to a new school.
Yeah, there's no consistency. Each state is different. Their laws are different. Requirements are different. But in the end, they're all our children. And in my opinion, there is no price tag on our kids' safety.
I agree.
So.
I agree. Piggybacking kind of on the inconsistencies and the difference in the rules and laws, Troy, as a former FBI agent, can you talk about your experience with training in the Bureau? And then you were a first responder to an incident, so you've got all these different agencies, first responders in law enforcement, but also medical first responders. Can you talk a little bit about that training and how maybe it differs?
Sure. It's, fortunately at the FBI, I've got some exposure to multi-state, responses and how that's handled, across the spectrum. And to your point, post Sandy Hook, it became, absolutely necessary that the schools were going to begin to accept training related to active shooter. And it was whether it was Alice or whatever the training was going to be. But one of the issues, as you said, it's not uniform across the board on how that's handled. And, we see a lot of issues with that because you have a lot of opinions on how this can be done, whether or not you want to arm your teachers. Do you want to have armed law enforcement in the facilities? My reaction to that is what was most important is trying to, one, get the adoption of a reaction and have plans in place at the school, at the student level, and then funnel that up to the faculty. And what you ended up seeing as my time through, in the Bureau moved forward is that adoption was getting better and better. And the folks inside the system that were the best at adopting the training were the kids. And once that was understood by the professionals that were involved, it got a lot easier. Oxford was, one of the most unique and horrible situations I'd ever responded to, not because necessarily of the spectrum of the tragedy, but what it did to the kids that were there. You got there and you just saw the looks on their faces of what they'd just gone through. But through all of that, it was the training there that got them out, got them, funneled into the right direction because they had repeated this training for a long time. That school district had done a great job of training the kids. What I would say, and lends to this conversation though, is every second gives an advantage if you're well trained. And it's the technology piece was the only thing that's missing in a lot of these situations. All of the training that the students get, the faculty get, they're ready to go in an active shooter situation because the unfortunate part of what's going on in this country, it's not something that we're not expecting. They've been trained, they know about it, they're not numb to it, but they'll react correctly if given the right opportunity. Technology in certain situations is going to give them that opportunity to throw the training into motion. And to Secret's point, Uvalde, horrific, but what if they'd have gotten 15 seconds of notice prior to that individual entering the school? The first instance of recognizing you're in the middle of a critical incident shouldn't be when you see it in front of your face. It doesn't have to be. So that's, I think, the evolution of the training is give the pieces of the technology that can get the trained individuals, whether it be your SROs, your faculty, give them that ability to act and put their training into motion sooner. And I think your outcomes will be far, far less horrible.
I remember as a mother, my son was in first grade when Sandy Hook happened, and I remember they started doing active shooter training, and he was in first grade. I was devastated. I'm a security professional, right? Like we always talk, we're in the movie theater, situational awareness, know where your exits are, all of that stuff. We had at that time, a lot of theater shootings. But then it was my first grader that had to go through it, and what I realized was he was actually excited about it because he felt like he was a part of it, right? And what we forget is we can empower children to be a part of this entire conversation. Children are resilient, and if we give them purpose, they will do the thing, right? But I think to your point, give them the time to be able to do the reaction versus not being able to get to where they're supposed to be because they didn't have that extra time. Really, really great point. So Craig, from an SRO perspective, in training and school preparedness, your program is mature. It's highly regarded within our community. Some communities, SRO programs are not. I know I've worked with a few school districts in New York, central New York, that parents removed their children from the school because they had armed officers in the school. Can you please talk to us a little bit about some of the reasons, A, why you think that your program is successful, and perhaps how you guys utilize technology or would be able to utilize technology in future training and community relations?
Yeah, sure. So we, like I said, you said in the intro, we run one of the largest and most progressive SRO programs in Westchester County. Our program was incepted in 2003, well before the acronym SRO was even on most people's radar. We started with one officer in one school district, and now that has expanded out to multiple officers across 2 different school districts that we cover. And we are probably on track to have an officer in every single school from K to 12 across 2 different school districts. So we really focus on putting a lot of effort into the relationships that we build in the beginning. I know, my chief of police has excellent relationships with administrators of both districts, and that is key. You have to have initial buy-in from the administration. Like you said, there are districts that have decided that for whatever reason, whether it's political, financial, or a combination, they've decided to scrap their programs, and we've added to our programs. It's really getting that buy-in from the administration of the schools to see the value in it. And then once they see the value, like to Troy's point, the kids love it. The kids don't see the officer who are in the schools as an authority figure. To some extent they do at the older school level, but they really see them as, just another staff member in the school. And again, we're in kindergarten, first grade schools. These kids have gone through this now, and they've seen the officers as they've progressed all the way up to 12th grade. They've been actively engaged in lockdown drills and procedures, and again, like Troy said, they're the experts. We go in sometimes and we run drills with these kids, and they are on the money. They can teach the teachers and some of the staff sometimes, no, this is how you should do it. And that really goes to the point that they are actively engaged in their safety, and we shouldn't be afraid to have these conversations with them and bring them into the security the security world and the active shooter world. One of the things that we really focus on, I think where this product is great, every second counts. We have officers, typically one officer per school. Everyone can imagine, even the smallest school is still a large campus to cover. That officer is expected to engage a shooter simultaneously while the school goes into lockdown. If we can automate that process and we can speed that process up and essentially take out the human intervention of someone having to pick up a phone or hit an emergency panic button, you're buying seconds, you're buying time, you're initiating that lockdown sequence much faster, you're giving people time to get to where they need to be to stay safe and let law enforcement engage the shooter. So I'm really excited to see the progression of technology, because other than cameras and a few other little minuscule things, we don't really see technology integrated into lockdown and security. We really see it as a hard skill set from law enforcement and a run, hide, fight methodology combined with lockdown on the student and administration side. So it's definitely exciting to see an integration of technology, and especially AI technology, that can really speed that process along.
Fantastic. So we're going to jump over to Steve now. Steve, what technology advances have there been regarding school and facility safety from a proactive response since you started engaging with RAD?
Thanks, Antoinette, and everybody else. Wow, very powerful, very powerful. Learned a lot in that. I'll share just first from the perspective of a parent, and maybe I speak for some portion of American parents. We don't want to think about it, It's something, it's inconceivable, it's unimaginable, and so you move on. And this happened, and me and a couple of guys in the room here started the company. We knew that we could do firearm detection at range. And it wasn't in anything that we really wanted to do because we didn't want to accept it as a problem. And then, Uvalde, of course, changed a few different things, and we said, hey, we're going to create the solution, we're going to bring it to market, and we partnered up with a company called Centralized Vision because we didn't want it to see a profit play, so they do monitoring for free, which is a great benefit. They're in this with us. This is about the children. And so the concept builds on RAD technology. And RAD technology is what we call fourth industrial revolution technology, which means that it is a communications hub within itself. That's significant because traditionally you got to run cables and network and all that stuff. You don't have to do that with us. The device right there, which we call ROSA, is it's 30 minutes to install. So that's new, it's easy. You can put it up right away. And in that box, we can do all types of different detection analytics. We do human detection, we do vehicle detection, license plate recognition, a few other things like that. And so, we said, hey, let's do firearm detection. Let's see how well our platform can use that. And, we're still surprised, I think, by, by how great the results are. And then, consulting with industry experts such as yourself and Troy and other members of our team and outside the team, we said, hey, is this something valuable? And the response has been unanimously and overwhelmingly positive, just like yours, Craig. Like, hey, you're an SRO. You may have an 8-year-old talking to you about his day, and you need to pay attention. You can't be everywhere. We have to supplement with tools. And now that we have the tools, we're here to try and get that word out. So with no further delay, I'd love to do a demo.
Yeah, fantastic.
Okay, so what we're going to do, Tony, if you can tell Josh to go for it. We're going to have at our Detroit facility, at our Detroit factory. You want to clear that? Yeah. We're going to have one of our team members who's been involved in the testing. He's going to take a long gun, an AR-15 replica, which is used for.
Detected. Lockdown initiated.
I can't even get the words out before the alarm comes in. So, what happened there was, in a few seconds, is there's more.
Detected. Lockdown initiated.
Okay. So.
Shelter in place.
In Detroit, this is all live, real time. There's nothing rigged here. So, which always makes everybody nervous, because stuff goes wrong, right? So, the device, ROSA, saw a weapon at range being held by someone. The bounding box for weapons are red, and it immediately activated a few things that you just saw in real time. Let's.
Firearm detected, please leave the area. 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 Area secured thanks to RAD's firearm detection.
Let's clear the locks. So on the locks, we were simulating green was open, and you saw them turn red in an instant, right? So we did the lockdown right away.
Firearm detected. Lockdown initiated.
At the same time, this ROSA is 1,000 miles away from the ROSA that detected it. So if you have these devices around, you can trigger your kids and staff to initiate what the response would be. And this happened immediately, audibly, without confusion.
Steve, I think it's really important to note what you just said and kind of focus on it a little bit. My experience has been when I'm doing security design work for K through 12 environment, typically in the smaller schools, they have an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school all on one campus, but separate buildings. Well, if there's an incident that's happening at the elementary school and there's 2 other schools on that campus, having one of these or multiple at each building to notify that one of those
Firearm
buildings is
detected.
having an incident,
Lockdown initiated.
the whole
Please
campus
shelter
gets
in
locked
place.
down. Right now, as it stands, when that happens in that environment, somebody has to relay the information,
Right.
right? Like you said, pick up a phone,
Yep.
hit a button, do whatever. And they might not be in the capacity to hit the button or make the phone call, or may not be in the proximity of the technology they needed to do that. So rather than remembering to hit a button or make a phone call, they could just save themselves and the people that are around them. That's really, really important
Yeah.
to point out on a campus
Firearm
environment.
And
detected.
adding to
Lockdown
that,
initiated.
the
Please
school
shelter in
resource
place.
officers, administrators can immediately get a text message. And the text messages tells
Firearm
where the
detected.
event happened
Lockdown initiated.
and shows
Please
the
shelter in
image
place.
of what happened. So now resource officer and administrators have that identification immediately without the phone calls. What happens in an emergency? Cell phones jam up, network congestion kills it, at least in the old days. Like we're better, much better now, right? So this happened automatically, lockdown, communication, initiation of response. The units are tuned to work outdoors in areas just like that, be hanging over elementary school and buildings, entryways, parking ways, poles, and those kinds of things. Troy, we talked about this before. Per your experience and studies, how often does the shooter come into the area with the, how's that sequence?
Sure. So, I mean, one of the common occurrences in active shooters is usually your active shooter himself or herself has made decisions prior to getting there. And a lot of those decisions have to do with instant engagement, and they expect that to be their last act. So what happens close to 80 to 85% of the times on mass casualty active shooters is the minute they're on scene, they're not making any attempt to conceal their weapon. So a lot of times it's as they get out of their vehicle, which was the case in Uvalde. You know, those weapons would have been detected close to 200 feet away from the front door of that school in this situation. So I'm probably not the most athletic, so 200 feet gets covered in 30 seconds. So potentially 30 seconds of forewarning to what was coming versus standing in the doorway of the classroom, which is what they were faced with. You're taking a very large percentage of these kinds of incidents, and are you going to have concealed circumstances? Sure. Can we gear for every single potential outcome? No.
Right.
But if we're operating, in my opinion, over 30% of the time and changing the outcomes, it's a win.
30 seconds is a really long time.
Very long time.
Yes.
Yep.
In a situation like that.
So,
Yeah, and there's one other thing about these devices that I just want to share, because we've got kids, right? So we don't always want to be severe law and order, security. So these devices, when they see you, they can also say, hey, remember, it's our 3-year anniversary of the school, blah, 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 right? We want to be positive in the community. And that's where technology is going. It's going not just from severe, but we're doing both, just like a security officer
You're
would.
reading my mind, because I was just going to interject that, to your daughter's, to Lily's experience, where this inconvenience of security is now being blamed on her, right? Because the family is pushing for change. There's always going to be a balance between that you have to strike between security and convenience.
Sure.
It's in everything. Now you have an environment where the security is being implemented and there's very little impact on the students and the staff.
Yep.
A lot of what we do in security, it's like we want to control the entrances, lock down all the doors, you can't prop a door, you can't do this, you can't do that. So having a technology that you can introduce into a school environment that's welcoming, that can have fun signs, talk about, the pizza party or whatever, they won the game over the weekend, is really a step in the right direction, because right now there's just constant friction. It's the friction between the people who believe that we should have locked down schools like prisons versus the people who believe it's a welcoming campus, let's open up the doors and everybody should feel like they are, you know, holding hands and singing Kumbaya. There's a balance, there's a middle ground, and I think this is a really great step towards that middle ground.
Yeah. The one other piece, and Antoinette, is, again, something that Troy and I have spoken about, is the deterrent value. You know, SROs, I don't know if there's stats out there that prove it, but are a deterrent, no question. You know, these units are a deterrent as well. If you're an active shooter, you've got a game plan, like you said. This is how it's going to go down. And if this thing starts yelling at you, before you've even done anything, it gives an ability to disarm and change what's going to happen, versus not even having a chance to change what's about to happen. So that's what we're down, and that's where we're at. So that's where we're at with technology today.
Can we have a short conversation? You know, when we were setting this all up, we were talking about false positives and false negatives. And I'm sure at some point conversation's going to come around, well, you know, what if it detects something and it wasn't real? What then? Can you kind of speak to that and what that does for training and other things?
Yeah, for sure. So there's always going to be a percentage of false positives and false negatives. False positives is when it sees something that it thinks is the gun and it creates the alert. A false negative is when a gun was in the image and it didn't alert, right? So these are always outcomes. And what happens is that over time, it gets better. The analytic gets better. So all the falses, we retrain. We train them away, just like you would with an officer. You train them away, and then you get really, really good. The cool thing about it is that when the analytic gets good, say, after the training we did here, it gets uploaded to the entire universe of devices, and we raise the intelligence of everywhere. So there will certainly be falses both ways. No question about it. Nobody can guarantee there won't be. And that's why we're using centralized vision, because some locations might say, hey, listen, you know what? I want the extra layer. I want the extra 20 seconds. We'll spend the extra 20 seconds before we go into panic alarm, and we'll have centralized vision push the button after they do the visual verification. So that's one of our ways to get around it. But we also want to give options to other districts where they say, hey, I don't want to take that chance. I'll trust the analytic. I'll put up with the inconvenience of maybe having a false lockdown and a false alarm versus losing that 20 seconds. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, I think that's good, and that's really important to kind of level set and talk about the, you know, what the capabilities are of the technology. But when kids' lives are at stake, as Secret had mentioned, that there's no price tag, right? So a small piece of inconvenience for the potential to save lives is really important.
I'd like to note that for schools that are using manually operated lockdown systems where they have to physically activate a button, we've also seen false alarms where the system has simply malfunctioned for no apparent reason. And yes, it initiates a lockdown sequence, but we're in the dark as responding agencies. We have no idea if that was a legitimate lockdown or if that was just a faulty system. We've seen it a few times. We've had large mutual aid responses, initiating active shooter response to schools, all for a malfunction. And I think to have the ability to visually see what caused it, and maybe at the PSAP level, at the 911 center level, the dispatch center level, to be able to also have that and be able to say, you know, I'm 99.9% sure that that was someone's cell phone that just triggered it, but slow everyone down, we'll evaluate it, and we can release the lockdown much faster than we can when we're walking into it blind, and we know, all we know is that the system triggered. I think that's a great point, and I think that's probably one of the steps we should be moving towards as the systems mature.
Great point, Craig.
All right, so I'd like to ask this one last question to the entire panel, and we've kind of touched on it, but I just would like to hear from each individual. Would this type of early detection solution, like the one we just saw today, be effective in helping law enforcement and school staff respond and prepare to what looks like an active shooter? We'll start with you, Craig.
Sure, I think that kind of goes to what I was just talking about. Any information that responding officers can get before they get to a scene is going to be helpful. And for the officers who are driving to the scene, having that information relayed to them from a PSAP, from a 911 center, from a dispatch center, that is crucial. It gives them so much more information instead of just going in blind and going in cold to a scene. Having the ability to say, okay, you know, we see a person with an identified long gun who's on the northwest corner of the building, shots are being fired here. The tactical advantage and the response advantage for law enforcement is huge compared to just, we're going for an alarm, we don't know what the circumstances are. I think that anytime that you can direct law enforcement, again, we're talking about very large campuses in some instances, anytime you can get law enforcement to the shooter and reduce that delay time, where they can start taking immediate law enforcement action to neutralize the shooter, you're saving lives. And I think that that's hugely important.
Troy?
Yes, so I mean, I spent a great part of my career running a tactical team that we served search warrants, we did all the things you think about, but if I was ever given the advantage of having forward eyes situational awareness, you know, one, it focuses the tip of the spear to where the problem is. A lot of these, you know, school responses, they're very systematic how they're done. And if you don't know exactly where you're going to identify the problem, a lot of time is being wasted because it's done in a very calculated way. If you give a supervisor of a team that's going in there in particular with the mission of helping and saving children, if you put them on the point of pain early, you will see dramatic changes in outcome. It's just an advantage that puts us in a very good position.
Secret, I know that the technology today is not going to change what happened to your daughter,
Sure.
but you talked about affecting change and that you haven't really seen a great deal of change. Talk to me about how you're feeling about seeing this and what this potentially could do. And
I think this technology is phenomenal. I mean, it hits every point from pulling up to campus, getting out of your car, and potentially being stopped right there before you even make it into the facility. And I think about all the chaos that day that it could have all been prevented, you know. 100%, maybe not, but you're going to have that information going in, knowing where to go, what you're looking for, what you need to prepare to react to. And I will share one thing with you all. I hope you all don't mind. These are Bailey's glasses. She had these on the day of the shooting. And I often wondered how they weren't crushed and trampled on. And but when she was struck twice in the back, a commons area couch caught her fall. So she fell forward, and her glasses were not damaged at all. 3 days after the incident, the state troopers brought her belongings to me. Some we weren't able to keep, of course, but these were. So I don't know if it would help anyone's decision for this technology, but when I got these back, she hated these glasses. She hated them. She hated wearing them. So if this will impact, just think about your children, and I can't imagine what she saw through these glasses that day. And it's heartbreaking. It really is.
thank you for sharing that, and I'm sure that she's very proud of you for having the strength to tell her story. With that very moving story, I'd like to open it up to any questions that anybody may have regarding any of the experience on the panel or the technology. Yes?
Question for the security professional. Can we bring him up? Thank you. My father's law enforcement as well, but how would you guys implement these at a school? I have two daughters, going to private school and a son going to public school. But how would you place these, and how would that actually work? You having like one officer on site, how would you envision that working procedurally? Is there a way to describe that possibly?
Yeah, I think we cover two different kinds of campuses. We have, like Antoinette said in the beginning, large campuses with multiple buildings and predominantly smaller campuses with single buildings. From a security standpoint, I would want to have it looking 360 degrees, probably from the entrances, and then maybe something out at an ancillary point out in the parking lot, where you kind of cover the entryways and really buy time. So if there's a central driveway, or typically most schools now are using some form of physical access control to literally steer vehicular traffic and pedestrian traffic in. I would envision something out in the parking lot area where you get maybe a larger overall view, and then something closer into the building, maybe by the entrances. Typically we see rectangular or square buildings predominantly, something that can cover all of those angles. And then in some schools, I would actually envision it inside the school, especially in the high school level, where you have much larger footprints. You have a higher risk of a student bringing the firearm undetected into the school, and then having the ability of the system to view the common hallways or the common areas, to really give yourself defense in depth, that ability to hopefully catch something outside, work your way in if it's not caught as it approaches the front of the building or the facade of the building, and then worst case, last chance, try to catch it inside the building to activate that lockdown system before hopefully a round could get fired.
Thank you.
Hey, how's it going, guys? Tandy Lau from the New York Amsterdam News. I wanted to ask, because I hear a lot about the roles of school resource officers being implemented in procedure like this. So here in New York City, we're currently having like a shortage with a lot of SROs, and there's a lot of turnover, and a lot of them might not have the best relationship with the students themselves, right? So I'm curious on how big of a role does an SRO play with like a technology like this, and can it still operate when, if one is absent or one does not have, one isn't fully trained or not ready to kind of fully, dig their heels in?
Yeah, I mean, this is Craig's area of expertise, but I'll chime in a little bit with it, where SROs are ideal, right? That's your best case scenario, and budgets and staffing all play a role in that, and districts are not all playing on an equal playing field. Mm-hmm. However, what technology does that like this, think of it as a force multiplier. You're using the technology to notify law enforcement in that community that these situations are happening. It's given them those, again, we talk about it and repeat it because it's so important, but it gives them that time to be at the very beginning of the incident when they start their reaction, because every community is going to have to divert resources in a critical incident like this. Well, the sooner that the police department, the sheriff's department, the state police are aware of this situation, the better the outcome. And these devices can play that role. They can make that notification before anybody else on campus can. And another thing I want to point out to Craig's point earlier, worst case scenarios, we have people in the school, and this incident is already in play, it's happening. We've all been to school. Schools are big. There can be an incident happening on campus in the building that is happening on the first floor in the English class that people on the second floor in the math class have no idea is happening. Just because gunfire is happening doesn't mean that they're aware of that up there. These devices are giving you that simultaneous notification of all the principal people that matter. Faculty, staff, SROs, whoever's been designated to receive these alerts are getting them together at the same time, bringing that situational awareness to the whole campus. So that's kind of the benefit you get, even if you have staffing shortages.
I think to our point before, a lot of the training is set to empower the people who are there all the time, which is going to be the students and the staff and the faculty, right? So the most important thing is saving lives. The SROs are the reactionary piece, right? They're the ones that are supposed to neutralize, the police officers are the ones supposed to neutralize the target. But this technology allows the soft targets, which are the children within the environment, to have the teachers be aware that something's going on, and then they can just initiate their training. And I sympathize with that SRO situation. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of schools that don't have the resources or the money or the political support to have school resource officers. And this isn't, I also want to make one comment, because this is not just about K through 12 environments. I just recently did a piece on houses of worship. We want to look at this beyond the scope of just schools. This is any target that potentially could fall victim of any kind of active shooter event. Houses of worship, I believe, and K through 12 environments are very equally targeted right now, especially in this heated political climate that we have. And so just think outside the box in terms of the application and use case of these devices, because it goes beyond. You know, we've got a lot of houses of worship that also have private schools. So we have to really think in your own community beyond just the public school systems. Any other questions?
I have a question. I know I'm not asking it to the panel, but we've got Nick here. Nick is, are you catching me? Let me get that mic a little bit. Yeah, thanks. Nick is Vice President of St. Moritz, one of, if you give it to Nick, St. Moritz Security Services, one of the best guarding companies around. Nick, coming here, seeing this, being a counterpoint to law enforcement as you're working on the commercial side, what are your thoughts and feelings in that space, following up on Antoinette's point of it going beyond education?
So it's certainly, you know, today, and I had this discussion earlier, the cost associated with security officers is rising. Inflation's gone crazy. Wages have gone up so much over the past 2 years. It's incredible. So everybody's pressured with that. So technology is really the next step. You know, it's a one-time capital expenditure as opposed to a security officer where that you need to pay every week. So I think, you know, this is where the future is headed. And the technology is terrific. And I have, you know, great respect for what you've done here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
All right, well, if there are no other questions, oh, yep, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm curious how you couple the information that you're gathering through this with some of your other capabilities that you've got through your devices. For instance, when the alarm went off, you've got a shooter that you've got an image of. When, excuse me, when you've got that going off, is that information then transmitted to a police precinct that's local? Will that image end up being transmitted along with it? Is there any sort of facial recognition information that's going to be going along with that? How do you address some of the concerns parents might have in school situations of actively monitoring that facial recognition capability within an area on a regular basis, concerns about privacy? And then when it comes to false positives and negatives, when you've got kids in some situations, for instance, instead of a parking lot, if you've got a schoolyard that kids are congregating in waiting to get into a school, you've got some, let's say, players on a baseball team that might be carrying a bat in their backpack. How is it distinguishing those, and at what point do you allow it to then, you talked about 15 or 20 seconds of review time, how do you then say, okay, you know, that's a baseball bat, and we're sure of that in an image that is that small, and also then relay information saying, oh, that's Bob Smith has got his baseball bat in his bag, or tell the police, we've got this situation, Bob Smith has a rifle, and you know, that's who you're looking for at this point, with maybe other database information that could be available to help them identify who that shooter is at the time.
Great questions. I'm breaking them into 3 categories. The first is process and function. The second is facial recognition and privacy. Antoinette, I'm going to ask you for some input on that one. And then the third is false handling on both negatives and positives. So the process and function that we demonstrated today is kind of like what we would consider the peak application. This is a district that has concerns either from a perception or an active threat, and they're not messing around. So a firearm is seen, the district will take on a percentage of risk for falses, and the doors will lock down, and the whole sequence of events will take off. So that's the maximum functionality of this unit. But the units as well, to your point, do other things too. So, you know, you can run multiple analytics concurrently. So you might be running firearm detection analytic all the time, and you might be running human detection from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. because you're looking for vandalism, break and entry, illegal trespassing, so on and so forth. So it's up to the facility, much as an officer or an SRO would have post orders. We're giving these devices post orders as well. So we're matching the function to what the facility wants at any one time. So that kind of covers process and function. Facial recognition and privacy. I'll share with you our position, the company's position on privacy. And then I'm going to ask Antoinette to talk about facial recognition for children and that type of tracking, because it's not an area I'm in any way familiar with or would ever want to have an opinion on at this point. So on the privacy side, because or due to my long experience with artificial intelligence and my significant awareness of its ability to create and execute on bias, our company does no biorecognizable tracking or recording whatsoever. So we're not tracking, you know, because the devices themselves, if we wanted them to, they could get pretty deep. Age, gender, race, like the list goes on and on. So what we do for clients on the guarding side who want to say, hey, you know what, that guy keeps showing up, we've given him some police warnings, next time we're going to come pick him up. So what we do is we do what we call human attribute detection. What color shirt is he wearing? Is he wearing pants? You know, does he have a backpack, a briefcase? So nothing bio, just human attribute detection. A lot of those types of crimes and infractions are done by people that aren't necessarily changing. So we don't want to get involved in anything related to privacy, and I was talking with Tandy earlier about how I don't even think it's necessary to have those bio identifiers in analytics whatsoever. I think it's just a problem. So that's my feeling, and that's how we activate related to privacy. On the facial rec side?
Yeah, so right now in the United States, we'll just speak US specific, there is no overarching privacy laws when it comes to PII. We all know that. So it's a state-by-state legislation. Some states will define what a biometric is differently than other states, right? And so you really need to understand the laws within the state that you're operating in order to even know whether or not you can utilize any kind of biometric identifier. Specifically in the K-12 environment on a global scale, when GDPR was implemented, there was a school in Sweden that wanted to utilize fingerprint detection for attendance. And the school put out a notification. They had an opt-out process. If you didn't want to do it, no problem, we'll do manual. There was no pressure. And they actually were fined quite a substantial amount of money because there was an imbalance of power. So even if you've gotten consent from the parents within the district, what the privacy board recognized was that the superintendents and the people in power at the school held more power over the treatment of the children. Their exclusion of being part of that process, even if they opted themselves out, created an imbalance, and they actually had to do away with the entire system. So most K-12 environments are not utilizing bioidentifiers in most cases. I think it's really important to understand facial recognition doesn't mean that, you know, I see that's Craig Scatola. It could mean that there is a face in my database and I've seen it 6 times in the facility, but there's no identifying features to Craig. We don't know, we can't tie the face to a name and an identity. So it's 2 different ways that we can utilize this image recognition where it's not facial recognition tied to an identity. And that's kind of a loophole in facial recognition within the K-12 environment. It may be that there are analytics where we can take the video that was pulled from a ROSA, for example, and process it through another software. And we could find out how many times that face was on the facility, depending on how many hours and days and months worth of video that we have. And while they're building their investigation, they can post-production, find the face, but still maybe not know who the person was. So the key to all of this is there a bioidentifier when you're utilizing analytic? And then if there is, now you've got to worry about the legislation.
No.
If that makes any sense.
I'll share that Europe is leading the way in terms of artificial intelligence legislation, just as they did with privacy with the GDPR Act. So they came up with this very, very complex and convoluted act, which really revolved around PII and sustainability of online systems. And America here, we legislate slower. Let's just say that. We legislate slower on those things. And what happened was the global multinationals instituted it. And they brought it to the States and enforced stuff like GDPR on American companies, even if we never did business in Europe, because that's how they wanted their global platforms to be. So I see this AI Act, which is running through EU Parliament right now, as, again, going to bring rules and regulations to America through that same channel, even though it's not legislated by our government per se. It'll happen. So I'm looking forward to that. It's I don't know if you've seen it, if you looked at it yet.
I haven't looked at it yet.
It's amazing. It's amazing. It's great. So that's happening on the legislative side. On the falses, like we said, facilities are going to have to accept a degree of false positives and false negatives. And to Craig's earlier point, it's probably, or it might not be any different than a human, because Troy, I know, is ex-law enforcement. And I saw an image that he had like this, and because my human bias of ex-law enforcement, maybe armed, my first idea was it was a gun. And the computer thought so too, right? Now, it didn't have my bias, I think. I don't know, is that smart yet, Tony? I don't know. But, so there will be mistakes. But there's mistakes with humans, and there's mistakes all the time. It's really a matter of, for me, from my perspective, is are we getting better? Are we always improving? We're never going to accept what we have. We're always going to get better. And number two, are we applying the correct amount of risk to the situation? Are we going too far heavy-handed? Are we going too light? And that'll always be the challenge and always the human part of the discussion. Thanks. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I apologize if it was brought up at the beginning. I'm late, but deployment of the box itself?
Yeah.
Is this in front of an NVR or DVR, or is it per camera? And how does this integrate with the access control system to do these types of shutdowns? Is it accessible with mag locks and other types of locking features?
Sure, great. Tony, let's ask Josh to run it. We'll run another demo right here, because they had a few people roll in. So what we're going to see here in a few moments, what we're going to see here is we're going to see, oh, you're going to clear the alarm? Is, so what you're seeing is Tony's screen. He's going to clear the previous alarm. And at our factory in Detroit, you'll see one of our team members with an AR-15 replica get detected. And a few things are going to happen. These locks, which will be cleared in a second.
Yeah, I'm clicking them on the wrong
Yep.
device. I'm looking at the wrong one.
These locks are going to go green to show that it's open. And these are just standard, mortise locks, whatever. So those will go red immediately. We'll get an audible and a visual immediately on site on the edge from the ROSA device. You'll get text messages with the image capture of the alert. Those will come up on phones. And then, because we've built cloud first, law enforcement, SROs, watch commanders' offices, whatever it might be, can get the alert as well through incident management, which is what this platform is, and have that instant awareness. And, okay, lights are green, and I'm assuming a guy's running.
He's got to grab a gun.
You got to go grab a gun. You got to go grab a gun.
Lunchroom.
Yeah, yeah. So you'll see it happen, and always on a tech demo, the waiting, it's like 5 seconds, but it feels like 5 minutes. But
Are you able to show the image that it's looking for?
it's going to pop up. Incident management is going to pop up.
Stephen, maybe just mention that it's not proprietary, right? So it integrates with the access control because it's not its own system.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
That's really important.
Yeah, we don't care what access control, we're just giving you a relay output into
Firearm
whatever.
detected.
Okay.
Lockdown initiated.
So-
Please shelter in place.
You want to pop it on the instant management?
Yeah, the incident manual, it's actually responded locally first
Firearm detected.
And then it pops? Yeah.
Lockdown initiated.
So-
Please shelter in place.
We'll see the image here in a second, or less. There it goes. So he's walking out, so we should have a stream of images, so you come in now as he starts walking back with the weapon. And that's amazing.
Just in that parking area, there's several cameras.
There would be ROSAs. So you'll see on the phone here, the text message came through with that first detection of him
Firearm
walking back.
detected. Lockdown initiated.
You know,
Please
and all of
shelter
this
in
happened
place.
within seconds. Yeah. Thanks, Tony.
But multiple deployment of cameras, I guess, is a better, the parking area, multiple camera situation. The AI is filtering and then sending a specific message to the central monitoring station, or they're getting all of the images and making the decision?
The AI is making the decision between the device itself and the cloud. And all of this is happening in a fraction of a second. And then autonomously, the actions that are set trigger. Now, we have the ability to send the
Firearm detected.
alarm
Lockdown
to a
initiated.
central operating
Please
center,
shelter in place.
an SOC, to do human verification before the triggers are hit as well. And again, it's just an
Lockdown
option.
initiated. Please shelter in place.
And then it's an option to do a human verification before you trigger it. And that goes back to the risk threshold of the clients.
All right, and then it's just one box in front of a DVR or an NVR?
No, there's no DVRs and NVRs. Everything is.
No. The technology, the stream, because if it was gonna be deployed on a campus, it would, ultimately ending on a network video recorder.
No.
For us in the facility, no.
No. That's how it used to be. Now, everything is in here and in the cloud. And there's no network anymore. You're just plugging it into the power, is it. So in here is your DVR, NVR, half of your analytics, your response and everything. So those days of buying a switch, a
to the
server,
edge, yeah.
marrying it to a camera, having the internet, done. You install this like you install a flat screen TV, and everything that you just saw happens. The connection to the lockdown, as you can see, is also wireless and can go, we use a simple web PLC device that pushes an input into the access control system for the campus. But that's it. So these devices go on poles, over doorways, choke points, those types of areas, and it just turns up like that. It's not a construction project like it used to be. Thank you.
But I think due to the open nature of it, it can be used in conjunction with an existing system. Most schools have camera systems now. So this is not like a rip and replace environment where you're gonna have to discount all of the investment that's been put into their current security solution. This is just enhancing
Yeah,
it.
you can, obviously we're using the ROSAs here, but your existing cameras can go in through the same dashboard, have the same analytics run on it, and trigger whatever ROSAs and phones and stuff you still want to run.
Any other questions?
Yes, sir.
What happens if, you said that there's a time for the school that goes into lockdown? So it could be like this, up to the school to choose like 10 seconds or 20 seconds. What happens if a kid is in the hallway, the school goes into lockdown, he doesn't get into a classroom? Is there a way to manually override the system from that classroom to get him in? Or is he kind of just stuck?
It's all up to the school, to their system, to their policies, to the school resource officer and admin staff on site.
That's a really sensitive subject, actually, in these active shooter trainings. The teachers are sometimes taught, lock the door, do not open the door for anybody, because the bad guy could be pretending to be a student. So they often train these kids, if they're in the restroom, for example, and the place goes into lockdown, they actually train them what to do next. And as Craig said before, they're probably more expert to answer that question than any one of us sitting on the panel right now.
Yeah, I don't want to go into too much tactical detail on that, but that is something that is addressed, and there are policies and procedures in place. Generally, a hallway sweep is conducted before the manual door locking is done. There's a few other things that can be done, but again, I don't want to go into too much detail in this environment.
All right, so with that, I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today and for the audience participation. It's been fantastic. If anybody has any further questions moving forward, just reach out to Steve and his staff.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.